I always like to play the what if games, and it just helps keep me in the prepared state for nothing to surprise me.
Yeah, I think people confuse the what if with panic. But to me, it's actually the opposite, because the what if actually is what keeps panic away. Leaders who rehearse crisis, they don't panic when actually crisis hit. In healthcare, in operations, in leadership roles, everywhere, if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority.
But the breathing, the bleeding, those things actually jump to the top of the list because those are immediate life-saving measures, whereas infection is a down-the-road thing.
What cannot fail? What risk am I holding versus pushing onto my team? How does that land with you?
So the prioritization, you have to know all the elements in which you're actually working through.
A team doesn't need perfection, of course, but they do need clarity. And clarity comes from leaders who are thinking ahead, not leaders who are like, oh, well, let's wait and see what happens. In this environment, what ifs are not optional.
If you provide them a box and say, don't go outside this box, you'll never innovate, you'll never improve. You'll be 20 years down the road and they'll be saying, well, this is how we've always done it. When it comes to being a leader, you're never going to be perfect. You're never going to have all the answers. You're really not. Don't fake it. The more you treat them like people and the less you treat them like a number.
So what if the biggest threat to your team isn't what's happening today, but what you refuse to imagine tomorrow? And what if the crisis you fear could have been prevented by a single question you never ask? Today, we're going to be talking about leadership skills that most people overlook, but every high-functioning leader needs. This is Rosabel Unscripted, where courage meets healing. And like always, we're following the arc that shapes every human journey: grief, growth, and grace. Today, we're applying it to leadership. But I am not doing this episode alone. I'm joined by someone whose words inspires today's conversation. Someone who lives this philosophy every day, and that is my husband, Reid Zohfeld. Hi, Reid. How are you?
How are you doing today, Rosabel?
Reid, thank you so much for coming into the podcast today. You recently posted something on leadership that struck me so deeply, and I knew we needed to talk about it here.
Yes, it really has to do with the what if mindset. I was sitting down at work last week and I was really just thinking about what is my approach when it comes to preparing? How do I prepare myself to ensure that if something does go wrong, I'm ready? And that's really when I started thinking about the what ifs. I'm always going through the what ifs in my head. What if this happens? What if that happens? Because at the end of the day, a operation, a mission, you always want an answer, because your soldiers, your employees, they're always going to look at you and they're going to want you to have the answer, even if at times you're just at a loss for it. So I always like to play the what if games, and it just helps keep me in the prepared state for nothing to surprise me, even though, yes, occasionally I do get surprised.
Well, it was profound, and it kicked off a whole change of thinking for me. So, like you mentioned, the what if thinking, that is a mindset piece. And one I've seen in leadership, we can apply it to healthcare, in your case, operations. But again, that is that question that you mentioned in that post: what is happening? And it seems to me that the best organizations are the ones who stay ahead, that they actually ask that different question, like, okay, what could happen if? So, Reid, when you hear that, what comes to mind?
Well, the first thing is not necessarily organizations. Let's not focus on the organization as a whole. Let's focus on the individual leader. So an organization has many of these great leaders that are going to be asking that question, because a what if in IT is going to be different than a what if in supply versus a what if in medicine. So that's really what I want to start with. It's the individual, not necessarily the organization.
Yeah, I think people confuse the what if with panic. But to me, it's actually the opposite, because it's what keeps panic away. The what if actually, to me, is what keeps panic away. For example, I'll give you an example. In healthcare, I once watched an entire triage process collapse many years ago. And it was because one nurse who's been doing it for 17 years, unexpectedly, she called out sick. I mean, this nurse was phenomenal. Everybody used to brag about how she was always, man, my goodness, this woman never gets sick. And so that very own day when she unexpectedly called in sick, not 1 day, but 2 days, but 3 days, everything fell apart. Why? Because nobody asked, what if she's not here one day? we couldn't believe how one system could just be built on routine and on one person. So tell me more about that.
Well, it came from an Army philosophy. And anyone who's in the military understands that when you deploy, the what if comes down to what if that person isn't there tomorrow? It's not like missions don't go forward, missions stop because there's one person. Why the Army puts someone through a cycle for training. You need to ensure that everyone has the ability to pick up that mission, pick up that job, and move forward, even if it's not to the same extent. So, what if something happens to one person? What if something happens to one of the systems that you're using to do something? What if it happens to a vehicle? What if it happens in life? You could apply that. What if something happens? It's all about preparing yourself so you're not at a loss and you're able to still function and get the job done.
Yeah, and I think that's key because to me, leaders who rehearse crisis, they don't panic when actually crisis hits. Right? What about that whole idea that everything is a priority? Let's get into your
Oh,
post.
okay. So that one, I heard that so many times in the military, and that's why I don't like even using the whole idea that everything's a priority. I remember I went in front of one of my battalion S3s one time. We were preparing for an exercise. We had red cycle. We had all of these items going on. And I'm a detachment sergeant. I'm asking the question, I'm like, these 5 things, what is the priority in the order that we need to do these things? Because I don't have the personnel to actually do that. And it came between my S3 and my commander and me, and I'm the one that had to figure out the manning for it. And I threw my hands up at the one day. I'm like, not everything can be a priority, because if everything's a priority, nothing is a priority. And obviously it's someone saying, I'm afraid to actually make this decision. And every organization will run into this, because you have leaders that are potentially apprehensive of actually talking to the people above them to say, hey, these are the limits. These are our resources. These are our personnel. We need to know what the order is that you want us to do these things in. And then giving them the actual speculation of, if we don't do this, or we do it in this order, these are the ramifications. If we try to apply everything at once, you can potentially have negative consequences across all those objectives, or you actually properly prioritize them and actually knock them out in an order that makes them successful.
Wow, this is so interesting what you're saying, because I have to be honest with you. I had never heard such a thing as everything is a priority. If nothing else, in healthcare, what I have heard is not everything is a priority. I've heard the opposite. So I'm just like, wow, it's like almost navigating 2 different worlds. But I need everyone listening to let that sink in, because in healthcare, in operations, in leadership roles, everywhere, if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority, right?
Correct.
I do remember one time seeing somebody in leadership doing this, pushing 5 critical projects at once, and the team was literally drowning. When she finally learned to sequence the work with what we actually call prioritization in healthcare, or let's say like triage per se, finally there was a shift. Productivity actually jumped, not because the team got better, but because the clarity of the leader got better. It's interesting.
Well, it's one of the things that just jumped in my head when it comes to healthcare. And this is probably something we've discussed a little bit before. We start thinking about responsiveness, breathing, pulse, bleeding, all of the things that are important. And one of the things we discussed before is, if someone's shot on the battlefield, the last thing you're really worrying about is infection. But infection is a very high priority when it comes to if you're in the ER trying to treat someone, because you don't want that person getting sick. But the breathing, the bleeding, those things actually jump to the top of the list, because those are immediate life-saving measures, whereas infection is a down the road thing. And that's really what when it comes in the medical terms, that's a life-saving thing versus we have antibiotics that could probably fix this type thing.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying. Let's say, I mean, we got 2 philosophies here, right? We have the what if mindset, and then we also have the real prioritization that you get. I think you get something powerful. I think when you have leaders that don't wait for chaos to reveal the priority, to me, that's wonderful. Or leaders who are able to define priority before that chaos arrives. To me, those are the leaders who ask, what breaks first? What can pause? What cannot fail? What risk am I holding versus pushing onto my team? How does that land with you?
So things are always going to fail. Something's always going to go wrong. And your team's always going to be sitting there needing direction. There's always a priority list to what has to get done. In the Army, I always prioritized, okay, if I'm getting a mission from 3 Corps, or I'm getting a mission from my brigade, a mission from my battalion, my company, I usually worked outside in, because at the end of the day, if one of those things doesn't happen, I'm pretty sure my first sergeant and commander would rather be the ones upset with me than the general being upset with my commanders. So I usually worked outside in on those priorities. What is the bigger ticket? Am I looking at other timelines? So if I had to prepare a system, is there a specific element that I can only get from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock? And if there is, I need to prioritize getting that element before I do anything else. Do I need to fuel up a generator? Do I need to run a cable? Am I looking at trying to communicate with someone halfway around the world? Well, let me look at the time and make sure I do it either when I get to work or when I leave work, so you're not calling someone in the middle of the night. So the prioritization you have to know all the elements in which you're actually working through. So when you start setting these priorities, you're just not setting something in the
Okay, thank you. Close the door, please.
you just got to make sure that whenever you're prioritizing all these elements, you know all elements around it. Your objectives are clear. You've done your research. You've put out the big picture, and then you broke it down into smaller pictures. Because I would do that with a lot of different items throughout my career.
I feel because a team doesn't need perfection, of course, but they do need clarity. And clarity comes from leaders who are thinking ahead, not leaders who like, oh, well, let's wait and see what happens. But the world that we live in, today's world is overstretched. We all know that. IT moves faster than systems can keep up. Operations are high risk. Burnout is real. Turnover is pretty high. The margin for error is thin. In this environment, what ifs are not optional?
Oh, definitely. And we would actually play this. There was a game that we would play during one of my deployments. I'd be looking at one of the guys there, and what if this system breaks? My job before is, if a system broke, we needed to know how to what we could do to get the system back online, because people don't like when military intelligence systems break. So we constantly had to play what if games. So what piece of equipments are similar? What pieces of equipments do this? Is there another network or another installation? Is there another way for us to get the mission accomplished? And not just providing us the parameters of what we were providing the whole parameters and not just boxing ourselves in. So I never liked the idea of putting your team in a box and saying, you need to be able to accomplish this mission. These are the priorities, but you can't leave the box. I always like seeing a young soldier or young employee, how they are creative, how they can figure out how to actually get things accomplished. And sometimes you just got to sit back and say, wow, I didn't think about that. If you provide them a box and say, don't go outside this box, you'll never innovate. You'll never improve. You'll be 20 years down the road and they'll be saying, well, this is how we've always done it. And until you get that one leader that says, why is that? Why have we always done it that way?
Wow. What I like about you described there is the fact that you are definitely making a way for that employee to feel valuable, to feel that their ideas matter, not like a robot, like in an assembly line. That is beautiful. I cannot tell you how many times I wish I felt that I had that, that somebody trusts me enough that I can make my own judgment in that sense. And I'm not saying it has never happened, but that is so important. But I've been in places I've known about environments where you are right. This is how we do it. It's A, B, or C, and there's no deviating from it. And then, of course, I'm sure that there are lines of work where I guess there is either A, B for whatever reason. I don't know. But I do want to say this before we close. I want to bring this to full circle, because to me, every conversation, every topic matters. And the full circle I'm talking about through our arc of grief, grow, and grace. The grief, realizing that the systems you trusted might not be as strong as you hope. When we talk about systems, there's a system for everything. For example, the growth system, building the muscle to think ahead and prioritize clearly. And then grace is basically offering yourself and your team the clarity that leads to confidence, not chaos. So, Reid, before we wrap up, anything you want leaders to walk away with?
If I could just say one thing about when it comes to being a leader, you're never going to be perfect. You're never going to have all the answers. You're really not. Don't fake it. Don't put yourself in a position when you're a leader that your employees or your soldiers in the army, they think that you're just walking the line and you're drinking the Kool-Aid, as I would say a lot of times before. Be real with them, especially when you have those difficult situations, because it can shut down so many conversations. If you can look at your employees and say, hey, I get it. It's not the best situation. This is what's going on, but this is the best thing we can do. And we got to get through it together, as opposed to you owning it and saying, well, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and we're going to make sure that the orders from above are carried out to a T and they're the most perfect thing in the world. I would always say, be real with them, especially when it comes to your team, because you will get more out of them the more you treat them like people and the less you treat them like a number. And that's really one of the things that I've always thought about, was treating them like people and not being that leader that's just going to parrot everything from above. Have my own decisions, think about things my own way, because I get more that way from my people.
Absolutely. Well, if this conversation resonated with you, stay connected with the Rosabel Unscripted community. You can watch more episodes, join the Rosabelievers, or download free resources at rosabelzohfeld.com/Rosabelievers. Reid, thank you so much for being here today.
And Rosabel, don't forget though, if they do want to see the posts, all they got to do is find me on LinkedIn. So these posts exist on LinkedIn.
Reid Zohfeld?
Reid Zohfeld Jr.
Okay, just like that. Okay, because I know your Facebook it's different. R.E. Zohfeld. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you for choosing courage. Thank you for choosing leadership. And thank you for doing the inner work that makes outer leadership possible. So until next time, I'm Rosabel, and this is Rosabel Unscripted. Goodbye, everybody.